And this news just coming into our newsroom moments ago. The independent commission investigating the Lewiston mass shooting has released a 30-page interim report that details their findings to date.
In summary, the commission found there were several opportunities that could have changed the events of the day of the mass shooting. Though the commission does say Robert Card was solely responsible, they state the Saginaw County Sheriff's Office had, quote, sufficient probable cause to take Robert Card Jr. into protective custody under Maine's yellow flag law and to remove his firearms, and that the SCSO had probable cause to believe that Mr. Card posed a likelihood of serious harm, unquote.
The summary states when the deputy responded to a report prior to October 25th, he should have realized he had probable cause to start the yellow flag process. The report also said Card had recently assaulted a friend, had threatened to shoot up the Saco Armory and harm others, and was in possession of numerous firearms.
They add limited attempts were made to make face-to-face contact with Card during a well-being check in September of 2023. It goes on to say, quote, the decision to turn over the responsibility for removing Mr. Card's firearms to Mr. Card's family was an abdication of law enforcement's responsibility.